I feel like this video is going to be a lot of me struggling to sculpt pumpkins. This video was brought to you by Squarespace. Hello there, it's October 1st. Last week I did a bigger project which was a ton of fun, but making an entire set of armor does take it out of me a little bit. So recently I have been following those bigger videos up with some selfish content. And as many of you know, my selfish content choice as of late has been sculpting. But despite my love of sculpting and the fact that as an illustrator I mostly draw the human form, I have never sculpted anything humanoid before. I have never sculpted a human likeness. I don't know, for some reason all this has just eluded me. So I figured whenever it comes to humanoid shaped masses of clay, we start small. So around I think August of last year I did a video where I designed some scarecrow folk inspired by Over the Garden Wall. And in that video I designed this Victorian pumpkin lady, and she has, for whatever reason, stuck with me in the old melon. And seeing as she does not possess a human face, but doth possess a humanoid figure, I figured this would be a good place to start my humanoid sculpting journey. So for this, I'm thinking we do a pretty much one-to-one adaptation of the design. I do want to make it kind of a scene. I'm thinking definitely keep the lantern, keep the umbrella, make it so that she has some pumpkins around, but also maybe have a fence behind her. And of course, we absolutely have to add some LEDs to this. So without too much further ado, I don't anticipate this being too terribly hard, but that is also a lot of ruffles. So I should probably get started on this baby with an armature. Since this is going to be a larger figure, to save clay I want to build out a lot of the structure and mass with the armature. This is a scarecrow lady, so I'm not being too detailed here. She's got a long spine piece, which I wrapped a skinnier length of wire around to be the arm piece. I built up the upper body with a little aluminum foil and electrical tape, and gave her two leg pieces similar to a tripod to help her stand up. Then the entire skirt was just filled and wrapped with aluminum foil, and I also gave her some bodacious hips, followed by a few crumpled foil balls to be the base of our pumpkins later on. And there she is, already coming alive, a freestanding aluminum pumpkin lady. I feel like this video is going to be a lot of me struggling to sculpt pumpkins, especially the hollow one that I am looking to make for the head. I've got my clay, sculpting tools, oil of the infant variety. They were out of the normal clay that I use at the craft store, and I didn't feel like paying more online, so I got original Sculpey. I hope that behaves a little bit like this stuff does. Yeah, I could figure that out with a simple Google search, but am I gonna do that? No. You know we celebrate impulsiveness on this channel, so let's dive in. But first, as many of you know, it is my sworn duty to periodically swear fealty to House Square of Space. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one website building platform that has everything you need to build an online presence, from sleek templates to analytics to e-commerce tools. It's been over a year since I created my Squarespace site, so I felt like it was due for a bit of an update this week. And Squarespace makes it easy to not only create a website or portfolio, I made my original one in just about an hour. They also make it super easy to edit your site and update your branding whenever you want. I could change the overall colors and backgrounds of my website pages, tweak the font choice, sizes, and alignment, update the pieces in my portfolio, and feature a couple more recent examples of my video work with their video blocks, all while keeping the same general layout. I could also easily update the products in my Squarespace store through my print-on-demand service. Squarespace has an e-commerce platform that allows you to link to external production and shipping services, and has a host of other features great for full-time entrepreneurs or more casual sellers like myself. And even though I know I'm not the best at website building or graphic design, I know I can get assistance on my site anytime I'm working on it, because Squarespace has award-winning 24-hour customer support and a library full of how-to resources. So if you're in the market for a website or portfolio, you could head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/PricklyAlpaca to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring another selfish video. Now let's get back to it. Like I said, the first challenge to this sculpt, since I wanted to put LEDs inside, was to create a hollow pumpkin head, which with clay, since clay lumpy, is a little trickier than you might expect. Thankfully, I have done this with foam before, and I vaguely remember the pattern, so I began by patterning out a teeny crescent moon shape, which I then transferred onto some rolled out clay, cut all those little slivers out with my box cutter. These pieces combine into two halves of a ridge, which are then assembled into 9 separate ridges in a process that includes baby oil, struggling, and tears, which all eventually results in a 3-dimensional ridged pumpkin. It's giving this. I know that's so specific, but it just is. pumpkin actually doesn't look too bad, but I feel like proportionally that is a little bit too large. I'm a little worried she's gonna look like she's got big head. I might make this an accessory and attempt to create a smaller one. So I repeated the entire process again, this time with a slightly smaller pattern and using the remnants of my denser Sculpey medium clay, and that density helped this come together a little easier. Again, I'm smoothing out most of the ninths individually before combining them and then combining the halves in the middle, and I did try to carve out the face before combining the halves, but that looked terrifying. Rachel, I know how you feel. So I did end up redoing it to make it look a little cuter after adding a little more clay to the face part to make it smoother and easier to carve into, to varying degrees of success. It's definitely cuter, but still has a haunted, sad, I have no sentience or soul vibe to it. Oh god, what have I done? Next, I rolled out some clay for the hat, and one of my favorite things about sculpting clothes, having the pre-existing knowledge of how to make fabric clothing, is that I can pattern clay clothes the same exact way. Except they're sticky, and I don't have to sew them. So I did the witch hat the exact same way I would out of fabric, minus the needles stabbing into my delicate phalanges. It's just a circle, a hole cut in the middle, and a curved trapezoid shaped into a cone with a circle on top of that. I also love adding little extra details to clothing like stitches and imperfections, and some little wobbly shape to the brim and the cone of the hat, and I equally enjoy the process of making the little hat decorations. The cords are just a little ball of clay with a divot poked in the middle and ridges carved and smoothed on the sides. I repeated those steps in several shapes and sizes and finished them off with twisted little stems. I also made some teeny shelf fungi for the cone of the hat, and made some tiny roses by rolling up thin strips of clay with varied edges. It also got some little leaves and other Victorian hat trimming nonsense, and I will now give you the viewing pleasure of watching my clay millinery come together. I also made some little thorny branches to frame her face with later on, and a couple more accent pumpkins for good measure, because honestly, you can never have too many accent pumpkins. Then it was time to begin working on the actual form. In a compact area like this, I usually will cover the armature in a thin layer of clay to build out the figure, and so that all of my clothing pieces easily stick to the form. And here I began mostly focusing on the pumpkin shoulders, since those 1890s gourds are such an important shape for this design. I wish I hadn't done the sleeves in time-lapse, but I did these in the same way I did the other pumpkins: smooth out the general shape, poke a divot in the top for the stem, and then carve and smooth the side ridges. This step requires a lot of oil of infant, but not too much because that ended up making the clay really gummy and moist. I had to strike a delicate balance whenever I was smoothing this out. Now we are on to some fun, overly detailed clothing bits. The vest, I just rolled out some clay and began eyeballing the general shape and pattern. I added a collar, a front closure, some striped texture, and some double-breasted style buttons. I'm really pleased with a lot of the detail in this, like on the vest and the hat. I feel like the aesthetic that I'm going for with this sculpture is very much something out of Nightmare Before Christmas or Coraline, and I feel like the style of sculpting just really sells that. But as you can see, that vest is just cut out and then gently laid across and blended into the figure, and before it's fully attached, a roughly bit of buttons is inserted into the collar. I then followed the same steps to create the back of the vest, and the blouse section is finished off with a collar and a roughly cravat, as well as a little brooch just to make it feel a little bit more Victorian. I also added some leaves and stems to the shoulder gourd, not bothering yet at this point to look up what a pumpkin leaf actually looks like, and they were also accessorized with some little curly vines. Oh, look at that, looks like a ramen noodle. She also received some tufts of hay popping out of her vest for a little more scarecrow authenticity, and after a quick break to admire the beauty and grace of the executive producer, this is what the finished upper body looks like. So that means we're on the home stretch. Oh dear god, that's right, look at the size of that skirt. Sculpting the skirt consisted of a whole lot of rolling out and pleating or draping large sheets of clay. I did this, of course, from the undermost to the outermost layer, starting with the bottom hem. I then ruched up a bit of clay and added some stitching and bows to be that center focal piece. And continued bunching up and draping layers of pieces according to my original design and adding a few extra embellishments here and there like trim. And when it came to those big old pumpkin panniers, I draped those much like I would a sleeve, bunching it and layering it in a way that I thought looked nice. And on the back of the skirt, I channeled my inner modiste and took a lot of liberties by adding extra ruffles, bunches of random fabric, accents and bows, and another big pumpkin poof on the back using this piece that resembles a pierogi a little bit. Maybe I'm just seeing what I want to see. Because, of course, she's gotta have that wagon. It was appropriately decorated with an assortment of gourds, pumpkin leaves, and other fall foliage. The front also got some vines and pumpkin leaves to match, and per my illustration, I also sculpted a tiny, wonky teacup. And because the nervousness I experienced sculpting the hands got the best of me, I mostly did those off camera, but you gotta hand it to me for just a pair of gloves. They don't look half bad. You want a high five?
High five.
Excellent!
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so unfortunately this has already experienced a little bit of cracking. There's just a lot of weight on the skirt going on, especially near the bottom here. So even though I am not completely done with this, I'm going to go ahead and give it a first bake. Right now, this is the stage where everything's looking good, except for, you know, the areas where it's cracking, and I'm very nervous. This whole original Super Sculpey terracotta clay, this is the first time I've used it, so I have no idea what the texture and flexibility is once it bakes. So I'm just gonna bake it and hope for the best. Hello there, it's day 2, which means it's painting day, and boy have we got a lot of painting to do. So painting is almost always my favorite step of this process, but today it does scare me a little bit because there is just so much detail involved, and it's probably going to take me forever. That's okay, but I'm also only giving myself a day to do this, hence the fear that I feel right now. One thing that might help me save a little bit of time is I'm going to have more adventures in airbrushing today, because I've used my airbrush so far for, whatever this is. I have now used it on a costume. So I'm going to try to do a lot of the detail with the airbrush to save me on time and also to get like really clear, nice gradients. Basically do as much detail as I can with the airbrush and then switch to actual brushes whenever it comes to things like the hat because it's just so tiny. So this airbrushing process did not go amazing. Somebody whose name may or may not be Kira might have forgotten that it gets dark an hour later than she thought it did. So it got very dark and very difficult to film like 20 minutes into the airbrushing process. Why are you looking at me like that? And I live in such a humid subtropical climate that both the priming paint and the airbrush paint had very difficult times drying, which made layering the airbrush paint very, very difficult and nearly impossible. So yeah, that's basically me here to tell you that the airbrushing didn't exactly go as planned.
Wow.
As you can see, I am very cozy right now, so I don't care. It went well enough. I knew that I was going to have to do a lot of this with a paintbrush anyways. There's just too many small details. I was very much myself whenever I sculpted this. So it's time to hunker down and do so much hand painting. But I would say I'm more than ready. I have Cat. I have my bag of very appropriate adult snacks. I don't know why snacks have ages attached to them. Like, what do you want from me? They're good. I really have nothing better to tell you. I am just eating goldfish crackers on film at this point. Let's finish up this paint job. So the detail painting process here is literally nothing new. I'm using the same exact techniques I use every single time I make something like this, but surprisingly enough, here I mostly just dry brushed everything. Like, this whole thing is just dry brushing. A lot of that was purposeful, that's why I started with the dark base layer. This time I wanted to focus on just bringing out the mids and the highlights instead of having to like get my paintbrush into every single crevice and make sure the darkest darks were dark enough. A dark base layer is great for that. What it's not so great at is making it so those mids and lightest
slightest bits actually pop as much as I want them to. So a lot of this is honestly just like going over the same areas over and over again to make sure they're opaque enough before I'm able to finally go in at the end, dry brush over that, and make everything really pop. This process would have been easier if it wasn't so humid outside and I could actually do this layering part with my airbrush. This was also a huge part of the humidity issue. I used a matte black primer for this. It dried glossy. So between the low opacity of my airbrush paint and the gloss of my airbrush paint and the unintentional gloss of my primer, the finishes that I was using just were not playing well together. Here we are, hand painting again, taking forever as usual. All in all though, I don't really mind the brushstrokes look because it does make it look more like that Coraline Nightmare Before Christmas Corpse Bride style. It's also reminding me a lot of the Scarecrow from Howl's Moving Castle. I think in the end it raises the aesthetic instead of hurting it. So last up we have the finishing touches to make this sculpture really come together. I almost didn't include all of the accessories from the original illustration, but in the end, I'm an overachiever and I really wanted to. My doubts mainly came from trying to figure out how to do the oil lamp without having any dangling wires. I don't think I could have wired a circuit small enough, so instead I chopped up a tea light from the dollar store, got it to a size smallish enough to be believable, covered the base in that and a little oil lamp shaped Worbla, and attempted the glass part with some clear Worbla, the key word there being attempted. It looks like I burned some plastic packaging with a lighter and slapped it on here, but I can only say that I tried my best. The lamp then got a coat of black paint and a dry brush of metallic gold, and to complete the accessories I also made a little rake out of some wire with the handle covered in hot glue and jute cord because hot glue makes for a surprisingly good wood texture whenever it's dry brushed. I used that same wood texture on a tea light to make it look like a stump for our other jack-o'-lantern to sit on, and now it's just time to assemble everything, which means excessive amounts of hot glue.
Time to pull a nerd forge and steal some gravel.
Now that our pumpkin lady is no longer headless, it's time for the reveal.
Hello there. She's done. I absolutely love her. Zero complaints, zero struggles really. Like, I'm sure you could tell. I just had a good time this week. I was looking for a project that I knew would not stress me out because again, last week was kind of big and that Halloween burnout is real. Like, it's October 1st and already like, ooh, Kira, hey, maybe slow down a little bit. We all know I'm not going to, so I have to take some time to just recharge a little bit here and there so that I can actually do everything that I want to do. Oh, I have too many things that I want to make this year. I am perpetually cursed with too many ideas that I want to bring alive. I am so glad that this is now alive and it's going to be a permanent part of my Halloween decor for as long as I'm breathing on this earth. Anyways, I hope this got you in an autumnal October mood. It's been so excruciatingly hot here. It's been a little bit difficult for me to do that. So this helped me. I hope you are also now feeling like a pumpkin. As always, thank you for watching, and if you want to support me on Patreon and see other behind the scenes stuff and see behind the scenes work in progress stuff of my big Halloween project, you can subscribe for as low as $1 a month. And as always, the absolute biggest thank you for these videos goes to my patrons and especially my executive producers.
Liana, Armature Jean, Anubix, Breeza, Elizabeth Smith, Bean the Bread, I Hang Out with Cats at Parties, Bobo McFo, Freya Wolf, Gravity Drop, Sweet Winter Garden, Katie, Hypnos, India Gloom, Enozine, Megan Penland, Meeks Hunter, Eloquent Silence, Lovisa, Thea Maia, Agent.Sketchy, The Cat's Bark, Alwyn Hayes, Shay Lee, Zyle S, Dodo, Cat, Small_Creeper, Francesca Sliwa, Freedom and Gus Gus, Sama Lama Ding Dong, Rose Kofrick, Rose Jaconi, Phoenix, Brian, the cat buses early, and Miss Wicked.